this is Stephen Boylston with The Social Grain. I'm here this evening with Julia. Julia and I were recently introduced by one of my very good friends who also happens to be her big brother. And I'm excited to talk to her today because knowing her brother and how he holds on to passions that he finds, um, I know that she is probably the same. And when he told me that she has a passion for baking and bread in a sense, I just knew that I had to chat with her. So we had like we had a little bit of a chat a few days ago. And after the first 5 minutes, I knew that it was the right choice. I knew that this would be a fantastic conversation for us to talk and kind of get her story out there and her family story and how she's interested in bread. I mean, we started nerding out over the joys of baking, even when we're not good at it. Like we may not be great at baking, but we still love doing it. So that made me realize that we need to feature her as an interview. So without further ado, let's get started. I don't want to spend too much time talking through that, but either way, welcome, Julia. Thank you for joining me this evening.
Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. So let's jump into the first question, and I'll just start right out the gate. What got you into baking in the first place?
So I think it came up naturally because my parents both cook and bake. My mom mainly is the baker. She wouldn't call herself much of a baker, but she was always whipping up banana bread or cookies. She would make us special cakes for our birthdays. And it was always a homemade, really unique cake. Like I remember one that she put a Barbie in the top of. And so baking's always been a part of our life. And my dad too would bake, well, not as much baking, but he would bake this special bread. And it wasn't always from scratch, if I'm being completely honest, but he would make a bread for us for breakfast, and it's called minutiae. So he would wake up early in the morning, and I would come down getting ready for school, and he would have this fresh baked bread. I would actually smell it from my bed because it has a very strong scent because of the spice blend that you put on top is this
Mhm.
Lebanese blend of spices with a lot of thyme in it. And I would smell it right away and know, oh my gosh, Minushi is downstairs. So
It's
excited, gonna
time.
run down there. Yeah.
Yep.
And as I would get older too, he would make it, when I was in high school, and he would always give it to me with like a Lipton tea. They go together. So pretty much I just grew up in a family that likes to cook and likes to bake. And so it's just been something that has always interested me. And there are so many kinds of bread. And so I think it's a fun experiment kind of to dabble into the different things that you can make, whether it's, desserts or just actually bread to eat at dinner or alongside something or, yeah, so.
Yeah, that's good. That's a really good explanation. And you've gotten so into bread, and I think specifically this minutia, that you've been a little bit profitable from from baking it, right?
Yeah, I'm trying to maybe become a little bit of an entrepreneur.
There you go.
Yeah, the bread is something that whether it was friends that had never heard of it because it's a very specific Lebanese bread, um, and us introducing it to them over time because we would always say, "Oh, we're half Lebanese." They'd be like, "What is that?"
Right.
And one of the first things that we would introduce them to is minushi, and I had never met anyone who didn't like it.
Mhm.
It's very delicious.
Right.
Obviously, I'm biased, but so I wanted to test out the market and kind of see if this is something that we could, offer to people and share a little bit of our culture with them, because obviously, in my whole life, no one has ever known what what minushi was.
Right.
Um, so it's something that I hold near and dear. I have a lot of good memories growing up with it and wanted to share with other people. So I tried it out. It was last month. We made a lot of them and took them to a farmer's market, and I put them out in little sample cups for people to try. And everybody was really enthusiastic about it and excited to try something new and different. And it
Yeah.
was definitely a hit.
Yeah.
So something I'm looking to expand on further, maybe there's a lot of other different farmers markets here that I can go to and kind of show it off. And it feels nice to be able to share something with others that is so unknown to them and just
Mhm.
widen their perspective a little bit.
Yes, yeah, and that's for I know you've been following the social grain journey a little bit, and everybody else as well. That what you just said is exactly what I'm trying to do, right? Is share the various cultures with the world, because like you said, people don't know what these other cultures are like. Most people that you talk to almost every single day don't know what minutiae is, right? And then you introduce it to them, and as you're introducing them, you're introducing a part of your culture into their life. So that's big. I definitely I like that. I like that. So I guess speaking of culture and sharing that culture, and we'll jump back into the bread in a little bit, because I'm really interested in hearing about some of that. But first, can we talk about some of your family's story? I know you mentioned that I think your dad's side of the family is from Lebanon. Can we talk through some of that?
Yeah, absolutely. So my parents, it's actually a great story. It feels kind of like a movie to tell it to people, but my parents met in Greece. And so my dad was living in Greece because he was going to medical school. And but he grew up and was born in Lebanon and still has a ton of family over there. And so he came over to Greece and was in medical school and met my mom, who happened to be there because my grandpa was working for GE.
Oh,
And he took the rest of the family. My mom's one of seven and my dad's one of four. So coming from, bigger families. And so he brought my mom's side of the family over, and that's where my parents met and got married. And then they, moved back here to Cincinnati, where my mom was born and and raised us.
yeah.
And yeah, so I don't know. I think that because of that, both with my dad being Lebanese, which is in the Middle East and on the Mediterranean, that we have grown up with a lot of Mediterranean food. We eat a lot of Greek salads. We eat a lot of beans and what I think is really healthy food. People say the Mediterranean diet is like one of the healthiest out there, and
Yeah.
some of the things that I just kind of took for granted or thought were really normal to eat, like beans and rice that you scoop up with pita bread with like a salad that's lemony and garlicky. Like we make dressing for almost every single night, I would say, for
Yeah.
a side salad that we would serve with dinner. And it's just garlic that you grind up and with a mortar and pestle with salt. And then you pour the lemon juice in there and scoop it out and put it in a bowl, and then olive oil and pepper and good to go. And we put that on everything.
Wow. Sounds
Yeah,
good.
it's so good. I mean, I'll just make that and like eat a whole salad to myself, and then I have the garlickiest breath. But I mean, who
Right. Right.
cares?
But it's still worth it.
Yeah, so worth it. But that's something I just thought was so common because that's how I was raised. Is use fresh ingredients, you're making things from scratch, you're cooking every single night. I mean, we would have dinner as a family, I mean, almost every night as far as I can remember. So, dinner time or having those family meals was a really big part of my life and a part of my memories.
And you mentioned something that I think is very interesting. And I mean, you said that it's like a love story, but your dad being from Lebanon and one of four, and then your mom being one of seven, and being in Greece at the time, like uh, that's insane. Like the chances of that happening, and then them falling in love and like building this family. That's insane. Like that, you can't make that stuff up.
Yeah, I think it's too like just a testament to America as a melting pot, like
Yes.
my family, I feel like is the epitome of like, the American dream in a lot of ways. I have my mom who's a, blonde, blue-eyed, German descent, German and Dutch, um, American woman who then met my dad, who then, he's an immigrant from Lebanon, first generation. And they were sharing their cultures with each other. It was my mom introducing my dad to America, and then them exploring Greece together. And um, also, it was the 80s, so I'm sure it was different times,
Right.
but just to be sharing in each other's cultures in that way. And my mom went to Lebanon with my dad when they, got engaged, and that was like her first time in the country. And uh, they're drastically different, and they still, came together like so many people do.
Okay.
To form these blended families where you're just sharing in the richness of your cultural history, and it just becomes like a part of your normal life without even, like, I don't know, it's normal to me because that's how I was raised and I know nothing else.
That
So
makes sense. It makes sense. So,
yeah.
so you mentioned the cultural blend. Um, how has that impacted positively impacted you and your siblings' lives growing up? Like what I guess how does that work in the household, right? You've got the like you mentioned, like the typical American side, right? With the traditional American
You have
things.
sloppy joes and
Right.
like hamburgers.
Hamburgers,
Yeah.
right. Like all that fun stuff. But then you also have like the next day, right, as Lebanese food. Like how does that work growing up?
So I think my mom would primarily, she would cook a lot. My dad would travel a lot for work. He was a sales representative early on. But I think my dad loves to cook. And so I think when he would be gone, taking out people on his sales calls and taking them out to restaurants, he would come home and he would be really happy to cook. So he'd kind of get in the kitchen and make some Lebanese food, like the food that he's craving, I'm sure, because that's the food that he grew up with and what he wanted to share with us as kids. That, after he'd be gone for maybe a whole week sometimes in Tennessee or, wherever for work, and then come back and make a literal Lebanese feast,
Wow.
which we would just love. And on top of it, in addition to cooking, one of the key things, not only is the minutiae, which you can eat at any time of day,
Mhm.
even though we really grew up eating it as a breakfast thing. I mean, they'll have it. You can have it as a snack. We grew up in the Lebanese church. I think
Mhm.
people seek out other um, people from where they're from,
Yeah.
and so we grew up where it wasn't only my dad who's trying to give us that um, the cuisine and impart his culture to us, but then also we had this church of all these people who obviously have a similar faith, but the food, we would have these
Yeah.
massive feasts at church. And people would make minutiae as like a bread on the side with meal. But again, I got sidetracked. Where I was going with it was the pita bread,
Yeah.
which no one really makes pita bread that I know, and I know a lot of Lebanese people, but they talk about it like, where did you get this pita bread? Is it thin
Right.
enough? Do the pieces stick together? And if you found a good spot to get it, they would buy like 20 loaves
Oh
and you put it in the
wow.
freezer. Like, not a joke. Like, my brother, who lives in Colorado now, and I'm here in Ohio, and my dad, my mom was coming. We were going out to Colorado. My dad sent loaves of pita bread in the suitcase to make sure my brother had the right kind of pita bread. It's
Wow.
like, it's serious.
So they're not playing around.
Yeah, exactly. And my dad, so one of the places you can get good pita bread, according to my dad, who obviously knows best,
Yes.
um, to his standards, is to Detroit. And there's a Lebanese festival that they have every year, one in the summer and one in the winter. And my dad has taken it upon himself to drive to Detroit during these two times a year and stock up on, like, maybe hundreds of loaves of pita
Wow.
bread and bring them back from Detroit
Wow.
here for the Lebanese festival.
And that's like what 4 or 5 hour drive for you guys, right? Or longer.
Yeah, I think it's a 5-hour drive from
Is
here.
it? Yeah. So
Yeah,
that's
yeah, yeah. Yeah.
that's commitment. That's serious commitment.
Huge commitment.
I respect that. I respect that. That's good.
So the bread is very important. Very important.
Yeah. Yeah, that's good. I love that. We're tying it all back together. The bread. It's all about the bread, the pita bread. That's strong. So um I definitely appreciate that, the discussion around your family's history and culture and cuisine, even like how cuisine has played a huge role in growing up, which you can tell. I mean, you can see your eyes light up, right, as you're talking about the food and the breads and all this stuff.
It's
Um
so good. I wish I could make something like feed it to everyone who's watching.
yes,
Yeah.
exactly. Yes, that would be perfect. If we can figure that out, let's do that. Let's make that
Magically
happen.
gets delivered to them when they sign on and watch
That's
the
right.
video.
That's right. So what are, or what, I guess, what is one of your favorite cuisines that you recall growing up, from specifically Lebanese cuisines, that or meals, I guess, that you recall from your childhood?
Oh wow. Well, there's so many. One of the things, and coincidentally, it's made with the same dough as the minutiae, but
Hmm.
there are these. It's called lahm bajin,
Okay.
and it's a meat pie essentially. So it's this basic dough, just yeast and flour and water. This basic dough, which is kneaded and let to rise and everything, but that you would use to make the minutiae is also used to make these meat pies and also spinach pies.
Hmm.
Um, and I guess cheese pies. They're not really pies, but that's just bread with either a medley of cheeses on top, or spinach and onions on top, or the
Hmm.
laham bajin, which is the meat one. It's onions and pine nuts and ground beef and tomatoes diced, not a ton of them, in this spice blend that has a lot of cinnamon in it. Basically, that is the key in Lebanese food. Like, they don't use that many spices. You've got like parsley, lemon juice I mentioned. You've got the
Hmm.
garlic, and then thyme, of course. But cinnamon is like game changer.
Is it cinnamon and
Yeah.
zit? Wow.
So cinnamon in the meat, and I'm just gonna say this because again, blending cultures, but I'm from Cincinnati and Skyline chili is a thing, and they
Uh,
put cinnamon in their chili. So
oh.
like how did that happen, right? And you know who owns the place? Skyline, Greek people. And that's,
Hey, there
did I
you
just
go.
not,
There you
wow.
go. It
Yeah,
makes sense. It all
it's
makes
all
sense.
coming together.
It's all
So
coming together. There you go.
but the cinnamon just adds this like hint of sweetness, plus the onions, they are caramelized, and so that makes it a little bit sweet. And you have the saltiness from the meat, and the acidity from the tomatoes, and it kind of creates this semi-greasy situation on top of the dough. And then when it comes out, you squeeze more lemon on top of it, and
Oh,
it's
wow.
just so good.
That sounds good.
Yeah, it's really, really good. So that's one of the things that I love. There's another dish that's always been my favorite. Andrew, if you talk to him, is gonna have totally different favorites, but my favorite was always kibbe, which
Okay.
is again similarly, it's onions and pine nuts and ground beef. So essentially, it's ground beef mixed with burgle, which is like a type of grain.
Okay.
Um, Almost like you're making a meatball. So you got the spices, which are again going to be cinnamon and like allspice and white pepper and salt,
Right.
um, and then the ground beef, and then the burgle, and then you smush that all into the bottom of a pan. And then in the meantime, on the side, you've also browned some other ground beef and onions that you caramelized and pine nuts that are being toasted, and you put all that in as a layer on top of this other, beef layer. And
Right.
then you take some of the mixture that you put on the bottom and you put it on the top. So it's almost like layered, three
Oh.
different layers. And then they make this pretty design on the top with a knife. They slice it up lightly, like carving into this meat, and bake it. And then it comes out, and they cut it almost like in big pizza slices, and it's so freaking,
Wow.
I
That
love
sounds
it.
good. Like meat on top of meat.
Oh,
And then
it's
everything else.
it's a meat pizza basically. It's like,
Yeah.
but no dough. But
Yeah. Yeah. You don't need dough. You
yeah,
got you got meat.
it's like a meatball filled with stuff with more meatball on top.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah. That's what
That
it
sounds
says.
good. That sounds good. Man, I'm
I
hungry
really
now.
digress. That was,
No, that's
yes,
good. That's
really
good.
good.
Like I feel like we just went down like a memory lane or something, and we
Oh
need
yeah.
to.
I've made that for friends.
Yeah.
And everybody is just like, what is this? Because again, I mean, it's one thing for what it's one thing that something different, but the
Mhm.
flavors are different. And again, it's
Right.
really that cinnamon or that allspice that I think is what changes it so significantly because
Right.
other cultures don't incorporate cinnamon into at least
No.
their, like entrees, I
No.
think. So yeah, that's something I've made several times, trying to perfect it to get it to taste like my tetas, because that was always my favorite thing. My teta's grandma in Arabic. And so she would make that for me special when she would come to visit, and she would come to visit for weeks at a time,
Right.
because they either were coming from Lebanon, or if it were coming from Washington, D.C., they didn't live here in Cincinnati. So they would come and stay with us for a couple of weeks, and she would just cycle through all of our favorite meals, and she would spend the whole day in the kitchen. Like before we
Perfect.
would go to school, she would say, "Oh, I'm making you kidbee," and like then I'd go to school and be like, "Oh my gosh, there's gonna be kidbee when I come home. It's gonna be so." And then she would be there, and it would be ready, and we would eat so early. I think at like
Yeah.
3 p.m. or whatever when
Right.
we got home
Right.
from school. Uh,
Immediately.
yeah, because that was what the like day became about, and it
Right.
was such a happy time because we didn't see them that much, and that was her way of sharing her culture with us, but also because it was hard to have conversations about other things because there's a language barrier.
Yeah.
I don't speak any Arabic. My dad does. My
Mhm.
mom obviously doesn't. She's American.
Right.
And my dad, like I said, would travel for work. And I think to learn a language, you really have to be
Yeah. You gotta. Yeah. It's
enforcing it and have someone else
right.
also enforcing it.
Right.
It's a lot of work for, I think, one parent to try to,
Yeah.
yeah, I mean, I don't know. But regardless, that was the way of her communicating with us. She's pouring all of her love into this. It really is a labor of love, whether it was
Yeah.
making the minutiae or making the kibbeh or making whatever other Lebanese dish. She would spend the whole day on it, and then
Right.
the joy of her sharing that with us and watching us eat it and enjoy it, and that was everything. Those are like
Yeah.
all of my memories is eating
Right.
and
Right.
sharing these meals with my family. And it's just really great. I don't know. So I want
That's
to share them with
good.
other people. So part
Yes.
of the baking and cooking too. Obviously, if you can't tell, I cook also, but
Oh, oh yeah. Oh
yeah. So
yeah. That's good. That's good.
uh,
What about you mentioned that, with the language barrier, even within the household, or not necessarily within the household, between, your generation and your grandmother and generate and her generation. But something that ties you together is the food, right? Is that's kind of the bind, it seems like, is that's what really holds everything together. Um,
definitely.
how do you use that food and cuisine to keep the culture going and to keep it alive, like for generations and generations and generations to come? I guess what are your thoughts on that? How do you do that? Like that's gotta be tough.
I think, especially now, my tata, we moved her back to, she's in Lebanon.
Hmm.
So, it's been hard to see each other. And one of the ways, again, we don't speak, I took French. She was a French teacher in Lebanon, and Lebanon was a French colony. So that was a way for us to try to connect easier, but I'm horrible at French. And so we would, try to speak. She would speak some English, and I would try to speak a few Arabic words that I know. But now I'll try to cook, or minutiae is like by far the easiest because it's bread, it's simple, and I think
Right.
that's why it kind of transcends the cultures, because everyone makes bread.
Hmm.
It's one of the easiest things to make. Arguably, I think it can be very hard
Yeah.
sometimes, but it's
Sure.
only a few ingredients. It's accessible, and so whenever I make something that is Lebanese, in terms of the food or with bread, then I'll take a picture of it and I'll send it to her on Facebook chat and to try to share it with her so she knows like it made an impression. Like I still
Yeah.
think about her. I'm not gonna forget her. Like I'm gonna keep making this food. My kids are gonna know this food. I'm gonna make it for them. I make it for my friends. I want them to know where I came from and what my roots are. I think it's really important to keep doing that and keep the culture alive because it only gets harder. I
Yeah.
think
Yeah.
as we get older and as kind of what I was saying in the beginning, I mean, it's almost like I don't know. I'm half Lebanese, and so I'm not married or anything. I mean, but I'm here in America, and I might meet someone who they either don't know what their background is, or they're a blend of a whole bunch of things too.
Hmm.
But it's hard to maintain that connection with the
Yeah.
culture. I think it's easy for it to kind of become diluted over time
Right.
and as generations pass. And honestly, it scares me
Yeah.
because I don't want to lose it. And I don't, if I don't marry someone who's Lebanese, it's like, oh my
Right.
God, like,
Makes it
and
hard.
so, yeah, so I have to keep it up or it's going to just disappear.
Right.
And I don't want that to happen because I mean, obviously culture is made up of a lot other than just food, but I
Hmm.
think that the reason food stands out so much is because you're really meeting a fundamental, like basic need. You're caring for one another and nourishing someone's soul and
Yeah.
body. And so you're providing for them and it feels like you're giving them a gift, even though it is just a meal,
Yeah.
it's all how you look at it. But I don't know, that to me it's like sharing a small gift of your culture and your background with somebody through the bread or through the
Yeah.
food.
Yeah. That's deep. That's deep. I like that. That makes a lot of sense to me. And then that is something that I understand completely. Right? Is the keeping the traditions or whatever it is of your culture going through generations. It's hard with things that are not food, right? It's it's just not an easy thing to do. Um, but yeah, I think that makes perfect sense. So if we can, let's go back to the minutiae, and I want to talk about now how is it made? Like how do you make
Oh
it?
yeah.
What is it like? Can you describe it a little bit? Like what is it?
So minutiae is a flatbread that has za'atar spread on top of it. Za'atar is the Lebanese spice blend I kind of touched
Hmm.
on.
Yep.
But it's essentially a mix of za'atar, or I mean, thyme, dried thyme. There's sesame seeds in there. I think there's probably salt in there. I actually this week I made kale chips with za'atar on it, and they were so salty because I added
Yeah.
salt because I didn't think there was salt in the za'atar, but there definitely
Yeah.
is
There's
because
good
of
job.
so yeah, so salt, thyme, sesame seeds, and then some blends of it. And this is the other cool part I think about it is depending on if you are Syrian or Jordanian or one of these bordering countries, everyone's za'atar is a little bit different, but that type of bread is, prevalent in that area.
Hmm.
And so we are on this hunt to find like the perfect za'atar, or try to make the perfect za'atar, so that the minutiae turns out just the way that it's supposed to taste.
Right.
So that blend is very important, but so some people put sumac in it, which is kind of this bitter spice. It tastes kind of lemony. It's good on
Hmm.
eggs. So it's that, and then you mix it with olive oil, and then you just spread it on top of your dough, and then you bake it in the oven until it'll start to kind of bubble up, the bread will, since it's like a flatbread. And I personally love those little bubbles in it, but not everyone. My dad doesn't.
Oh, really?
Way, but I like So yeah, so then it comes out and it's a flatbread, and then it's big and round,
Right.
almost like a naan bread type of
Okay.
situation with the spices on top of it, which are then baked into it like a thick layer
Yeah.
on top.
Yeah.
And then you will either fold it up and eat it, or you can like fill it with cheese and mint or parsley and tomatoes and cucumbers and eat it kind of like a sandwich.
Yeah.
Or sometimes I'll put eggs in it. It's so good. Honestly, you're making me hungry talking about all this stuff.
You about to go make one right now?
Yeah. Oh my gosh. Uh, so yeah, that's how it's made. And the dough itself, sometimes I think I mentioned we don't always make the dough from scratch. I
Right.
mean, it's time consuming to make
Right.
bread.
Yeah.
But so we'll sometimes use these like frozen dinner rolls, and you'll, let them thaw with some flour on them, and then roll them out with a rolling pin really, really thin. And then you will again mix up the za'atar and the olive oil and spread it on top and bake them. So you can make all different kinds of sizes. And I think
Okay.
across the different families that we know, everyone makes them a little bit differently.
Right. Right.
And my best friend's mom, she'll make them like really small like this. And so it's always fun to go over to their house because it's like, oh, we're going to eat the like mini minutiae, but they're crispier because they're
Right.
smaller. So it's a whole different kind of minutiae basically.
Yeah. Yeah.
Whereas my dad, he likes to make them bigger, and I think likes them to be more floppy and like oilier. And in Lebanon, they actually will deliver them to you like big in pizza boxes, like they're massive,
Wow.
like the size of a pizza, actually. And you can either get it where it's all za'atar, or you can do half that's all cheese, and then
Okay.
flip it on top of it, so it's like cheese and
Yeah.
so good.
Yeah.
But minutiae is actually, so the minutiae is not just the za'atar kind. I realize that we just assume it's the kind that has za'atar on it, but minutiae actually means it's a type of bread that you're cooking over this special kind of oven.
Oh.
So it's called a saj,
Okay.
and it's a dome shape, a metal dome shape, and it has an open flame underneath it. And then you would take the dough and you put it on top of this dome that's hot, like very, very hot. And then it cooks from the bottom. And you have the za'atar on it with the olive oil, or you
Right.
have the cheese, or all these different things that you can do. But I learned that because I was trying to sell them. And need to know these things.
Yes.
Yeah. And something else I had learned, my dad for my entire life would tell me that like eat this minutiae, it's good for your brain. and he would wake up early and he would make us the minutiae before school, and he knew we had a test. And it was so cute, but I thought he was just like puffing me up, so I'd like get an
Right.
A on the test and feel like,
Right.
oh yeah, I'm strong and mentally like prepared. But I looked it up, and thyme has some properties that are really good for your brain function or
Oh,
cognitive
really?
function. Yeah, so it's like,
Oh,
oh, okay, Dad.
he knew what he was talking about.
This whole time.
Wow. Wow. He knew exactly what he was talking about.
A doctor.
There you go.
He knew
There
what
you
he was
go.
talking about.
Who would have ever
I
thought
should have
it?
trusted him right off the bat.
Exactly. Exactly.
Yeah. So yeah, that's some other good information
There
about
you go.
minutiae. So
There you
it's not
go.
only good for you and nutritious, and delicious, but yeah, it's just great. So
Good for your brain. And it's good for your brain. That's good.
good for your brain.
It's good to know. Well, I definitely appreciate that. I mean, you've hit on a lot in the short time we've been talking today, as far as the memories that you've drawn from some of this food and your culture, and keeping the culture alive and everything like that. So I think that this has definitely been a great conversation. I love your passion for cuisine in general, for cooking. So definitely thank you for taking the time to talk to me today.
Absolutely. I'm so glad that I could share that with you.
Yes, yes. So, all right, we're actually about to get kicked out of Zoom. So,
Oh no.
well, thank you everybody that's watching. Thank you for watching. Everybody that's listening, thank you for listening. Julia, I'm gonna have to get this recipe for minutiae from you at least, and see if I can't try to replicate in some way. Uh,
Absolutely.
yes, and you'll be hearing from me to see whether I succeed or fail on that. So keep posted on that. But either way, it was good talking to you. Very good talking to you. Uh, for anybody that wants to know more about the Lebanese culture, definitely reach out. I think that there's obviously a ton of good foods. There's a ton of good culture. There's a ton of good just information that we can learn from talking to each other, right? From speaking. So thank you again, Julia, for sharing, and everybody watching and listening. Thank you all for watching, and we will see everybody later. Bye.
Yeah, thanks.